1961, Holloman Air Force Base, New Mexico. Captain Hensley was ordered to conduct night trials of an experimental aircraft, a machine built to push beyond known limits at the height of the Cold War. By day, the desert shimmered under a punishing sun, a silence so deep it seemed to erase the world. By night, the air froze, the steel hangars groaning like ships adrift in an unseen sea. Radar screens began to falter, always in the same sectors, black voids no one could explain. Guards whispered of shapes sliding across the moon, shadows that lingered where no aircraft flew. Command dismissed it as fatigue, but unease settled over the base like a second atmosphere. Beyond the fences, in the villages that had watched these skies for generations, people spoke in lower tones. What the soldiers called malfunctions, they called warnings. The desert around Holloman was a place that did not forgive presence. At noon, the horizon wavered as though the earth itself were melting, turning distance into a mirage that consumed bearings. Boots sank into powder-dry sand that scalded through soles, and water evaporated before it could cool a throat. At dusk, the heat collapsed without warning, and the night pressed down like a blade of glass. Steel hangars, stretched and warped by the day's furnace, contracted with loud metallic cracks, startling even seasoned men. The wind carried dust fine enough to cut skin, filling lockers, rifles, and lungs with a taste of stone. Everything here resisted permanence. Wood splintered, metal corroded, skin split. Even silence had weight, so heavy that men swore it pressed against the chest. For soldiers, survival became a rhythm measured by extremes. Heat rash and frostbite appeared within the same 24 hours, carving into flesh like signatures of the land. Fuel lines congealed, optics clouded, and tires burst without warning. Nothing remained stable. Every system fought against the environment. The absence of landmarks magnified disorientation. Every horizon mirrored the last, until even the most disciplined patrols felt swallowed. At night, the stars were too sharp, too close, piercing through the black as if they might fall. Men reported strange impulses, the urge to fire into empty sky, to run though there was nowhere to go, to listen for a sound that never came. The desert stripped certainty away, leaving only vigilance and exhaustion. The instruments were the first to betray unease. Radar sweeps, precise by design, returned with gaps too exact to dismiss. Not static, not noise, just absence, rectangular voids where data should have lived. Technicians replaced tubes, recalibrated arrays, and even rewired entire panels, yet the gaps returned, fixed in place like scars in the sky. Aircraft passing through these coordinates reported transient blindness, altimeters freezing, compasses spinning, radios cutting to silence mid-command. Pilots described sensations of weightlessness, as if air itself had thinned, their engines straining against invisible resistance. Back on the ground, logs recorded anomalies but offered no explanation, only repetition. The black sectors became entries in binders no one wanted to open twice. Beyond the perimeter fence, the interpretation was older and far less technical. The land's original watchers claimed the sky contained passages, thresholds not meant for human crossing. To them, the blind spots were corridors, guarded and eternal, not errors of machinery. Children were warned not to point toward them, not to speak their names after dark. Soldiers laughed when told of such prohibitions, but the laughter thinned when instruments failed again, precisely where the elders had described. Some dismissed the silence as coincidence. Others wondered if coincidence could repeat with such precision. The technicians returned to their checklists and the villagers to their warnings, each side certain of its truth. But the desert kept its own counsel, and the black sectors remained. Captain Hensley's first assignment placed him inside the cockpit of a T-38 Talon, the Air Force's newest supersonic trainer, a machine engineered for precision at the edge of control. The twin engines lifted him quickly into the desert night, climbing past 15,000 feet with smooth efficiency. For several minutes, everything aligned, the gauges steady. the canopy reflecting a sky scattered with stars, the desert shrinking below. Then something shifted. Out of the corner of his eye, a vast shadow slid beneath the jet, moving without turbulence, without light. It was too large to be another aircraft, too fluid to be a reflection. He tightened his grip on the stick, adjusted his angle, searched for a cause. The radar returned nothing but clarity. The sky, by all accounts, was empty. The contradiction burned deeper than the sight itself. A pilot could accept strange reflections, atmospheric distortions, even fatigue. But emptiness on the radar meant one thing. The anomaly was not supposed to exist. He banked hard, testing if the shadow would slip away with the maneuver. Instead, it curved beneath him, answering movement with movement. His hand hovered over the radio, hesitating. To call it in was to admit it. Instead, he logged the altitude, the coordinates, the time, facts to hold against the unknown. The shape shifted, stretching like wings, then retracted into darkness. Sweat traced down his jaw, despite the freezing air. By the time the desert swallowed the shadow whole, the Talon's instruments still read flawless. Only Hensley knew otherwise. Beyond the barbed wire of Holloman, the anomaly touched the villages in another form. That same night, ceremonies deep in the desert were interrupted by sudden detonations in the sky. They were not the rolling thunder familiar to the people, nor the sharp cracks of sonic tests they had long endured. These were hollow, abrupt, like stone breaking in the air. Elders silenced the drums, ordered the fires dimmed, and gathered families closer. The night grew heavy, carrying a silence that felt intentional, imposed. Women pressed children to doorways, whispering words not found in English, words meant to guard against something that did not belong. When the echoes faded, one elder spoke as though delivering a verdict. The spirit of the storm has returned. His words were not metaphor, but memory, preserved through generations. They had been told of wings vast enough to shake the sky, of guardians who took men into the clouds, and of times when the ground was forbidden to look upward. Children stared into the black horizon, watching not for shapes, but for what their elders refused to name. The fires dwindled to embers, their light bending strangely against the wind. No song rose again that night. The desert had shifted, and everyone felt it. Hensley guided the T-38 back to Holloman with steady hands that betrayed their tremor only after touchdown. The ground crew saw nothing amiss, no damage, no irregularities, no reason for alarm. Yet inside his logbook, his account cut differently. In precise script, he recorded, "Unidentified winged object observed, no radar confirmation." The words stood out, breaking the rhythm of altitude checks and fuel notes. When the report reached command, it was stamped in red and quietly pulled from circulation. Hensley expected questions, perhaps disbelief, perhaps reprimand. What he received instead was silence. The file disappeared into archives, sealed as quickly as it had been written. Hours later, the official conclusion arrived. Command labeled the sighting an atmospheric illusion, a meteorological anomaly, an error of light, nothing more. The classification reduced the encounter to irrelevance, but the pilots who heard Hensley's tone on landing knew better. He had spoken of pursuit, not apparition. He believed the shadow had followed him, measured him. Those words never made it into the final file, but they lived in whispers across the barracks. The sky had revealed something outside the boundaries of their instruments, and worse, outside the boundaries of what command was willing to admit. The days after Hensley's report brought no clarity, only contradictions. Civilians from towns along the desert edge described something alive, a shape vast enough to blot stars, wings beating with unnatural rhythm. To them it was no machine, no secret project. Its movement was too fluid, too deliberate, as though the sky itself carried a living weight. Farmers claimed their livestock scattered at the sound, though no aircraft passed overhead. Children whispered of feathers falling like ash, though nothing was found. These accounts, scattered yet consistent, painted an image difficult to ignore. But the official channels treated them as noise, anecdotes unworthy of attention. Inside the base, officers produced their own version of the unknown. In terse language, they documented aerial artifact of unconventional design, careful to avoid words that hinted at life. The object, they insisted, bore resemblance to craft, though its absence from radar made classification impossible. Reports described an outline with geometry that defied aeronautical sense. No stabilizers, no fuselage, only sweeping arcs that seemed to flex in air. Such phrasing suggested weaponry, perhaps Soviet, perhaps experimental. Between the lines, however, the language betrayed discomfort. To admit it was a machine meant conceding that someone had built it. And if someone had built it, the question of who and how remained unanswered. The contradiction deepened with every testimony filed. Civilians spoke of wings, officers of weapons. Pilots whispered of both. Rumors spread through barracks that command already knew, that the object was not new but recurring, a phenomenon cited before and buried in classified archives. Each version carried weight, yet none could disprove the others. What was certain was the unease that thickened across the desert, a tension that no drill or order could disperse. For the men at Holloman, the line between myth and threat blurred. Whether creature or construct, the unknown had claimed the sky, and neither side, civilian nor military, could explain it away. The contradictions reached a breaking point when command authorized an interception. 4 T-38 Talons were scrambled into the desert night, their afterburners cutting clean scars of fire across the horizon. The order was simple: confirm, identify, and if possible, engage the anomaly. Radios crackled with clipped voices as the jets climbed, their instruments calibrated and armed. On the ground, technicians crowded around radar consoles, watching the green sweep for a trace of the intruder. At first, the night was empty, only the usual returns of mountains and sky clutter. Then, without warning, a new contact appeared, large, slow, deliberate, keeping pace just beyond the jet's approach. The pilots called it in, voices tense but controlled. 2 broke formation to flank while the lead pressed forward, guiding his Talon toward the echo. Instruments flickered, then steadied, as if the anomaly itself bent the electronics around it. The first to approach spoke quickly, his words cutting short. "It's moving, like wings." Then silence. Another voice followed, strained, almost breaking. "It's beating them. God, it's..." The transmission cut, swallowed in static. On the ground, the console froze, unable to track. For a moment, the room was filled with nothing but the hum of failing machines and the pounding of anxious hearts. Minutes passed, each one stretching into wait. Then a final burst broke through the static, a voice no longer calm, but raw. "It's right behind me." That was the last message Holloman received. No distress beacon, no mayday call. Just silence, so absolute that even the technicians refused to speak. The 4 Talons vanished from radar as though erased. Searchlights swept the desert, but the sky remained still, offering nothing back. To those who had listened, the words carried more than fear. They carried confirmation. Whatever haunted the desert air was not rumor, not illusion. It was real, and it could not be fought. The control room did not erupt with noise. It collapsed into a suffocating stillness. Protocol dictated immediate search procedures, yet no one moved at first. The 4 Talons were gone, erased mid-flight, leaving only the hollow rhythm of the radar sweep across blank screens. Officers forced themselves into motion, issuing orders for emergency scans, dispatching helicopters, calling for perimeter sweeps. Technicians recalibrated every channel, searching for echoes, static, anything that suggested survival. Nothing returned. Not a beacon, not a distress code. The sky above the desert gave back only silence. Teams spread across the night in convoys, headlights sweeping the sand in futile arcs. They expected wreckage, parachutes, fire in the distance, signs of men forced from the sky. Instead, The desert offered nothing but its own unbroken vastness. Some patrols reported strange distortions, stars vanishing in clusters, whole sections of the night erased, then returning without pattern. One squad claimed the horizon folded, as if space itself had bent to swallow light. Such reports were dismissed in official notes as fatigue, misperception under stress. But the men who spoke them did not retract their words. They knew what they had seen, even if the sky refused to leave proof. Captain Hensley remained in the control room, headset clamped to his ear long after the last voice had cut away. He heard nothing but static, but he would not remove it. Around him, officers barked orders, but he stood apart, eyes fixed on the empty sweep of the console. He knew the reports would write this night as accident, equipment failure, human error, another file sealed in red. Yet the truth was carved into him by what he had heard, the rhythm of wings, the breaking of voices, and then the silence. The desert had not claimed machines, it had claimed men, and Hensley felt, with a weight he could not speak aloud, that it was not finished. The desert sky broke 2 nights later. Without warning, black, swollen clouds rolled over Holloman, dragged across the horizon as if summoned. Lightning tore the heavens in jagged arcs, striking so close the hangars shuddered like drums. The air thickened with the metallic tang of ozone, and every antenna hissed alive with interference. Soldiers stared upward, some shielding their eyes, others clutching radios that returned only static. This was no storm they recognized. There was rhythm in the thunder, each strike landing like an answer to something unseen above. The desert had been silent too long. Now it spoke in fury. The storm did not fade quickly. For hours, lightning split the sky without rain, a ceaseless bombardment of light and sound. Instruments failed, compasses spun, the talons grounded in their hangars like caged birds. Technicians logged voltages beyond tolerance, frequencies no weather had ever produced. And then, buried in the static, came voices, fragmented, looping, but unmistakable. They were the same voices that had gone silent days before. It's moving, like wings. It's right behind me. The pilot's last words, torn from the night, now stitched into thunder. Some men covered their ears, others fell to their knees. When word of the storm reached the nearby villages, the people did not hesitate. To them, it was not weather, but warning. A Navajo elder rose before his people and spoke with gravity, his voice carrying across the gathering. The Thunderbird has returned, and his voice was ignored. Among those present stood Captain Hensley, sent by officers to hear the words himself. He listened, his jaw tightening, his mind rejecting what his ears received. Thunderbird, creature of legend, impossible, unrecorded. To believe it was to surrender reason. And yet the storm's voices had spoken, repeating the last cries of his fellow pilots. Hensley turned away, unwilling to accept, but unable to forget. Captain Hensley did not wait for orders. In the days after the storm, he pressed command relentlessly, demanding permission to take the Talon back into the night. He called it a mission of reconnaissance, but everyone in the room knew the truth. He sought an answer, and perhaps revenge. At last, faced with mounting pressure and lacking other options, command yielded. A single aircraft would be launched, flown by the man who had first seen the shadow. Hensley strapped into the cockpit with the weight of silence behind him. The runway stretched endless, and when the Talon roared free of Earth, he carried not orders, but obsession. The night sky opened wide, stars scattered across a darkness too sharp to comfort. Hensley climbed, instruments steady, the hum of engines filling the void. He scanned the horizon, searching for what others had died chasing. For long minutes, nothing stirred. The desert below lay flat, indifferent, and the cockpit hummed with sterile order. Then, behind him, movement, too vast, too deliberate. His canopy reflected a darkness that was not sky. He banked hard, rolled, dove, testing the shadow's reaction. It followed, precise as a mirror. Every maneuver answered with one of its own. The hunter's roll cracked. The realization came cold. He was not tracking. He was being tracked. In that moment, the desert itself seemed to vanish. There was only the talon, fragile metal in endless night, and the vastness that pursued it. Hensley gritted his teeth, forcing his mind into procedure, altitude, bearings, speed, anything to preserve discipline. Yet the presence behind him bent more than sky. It bent thought, pressing on his chest, making each breath shallow. He spoke into the radio, but the line returned empty static, swallowing his words whole. The first strike came without warning. Lights across the console flickered and died, alarms cascaded, and every automated system fell silent at once. The Talon, built for precision through circuits and code, had been stripped to nothing. Hensley's hands clamped to the stick, pulling the jet into manual control, every movement raw and heavy. The airframe shuddered, as though resisting his will, each surface fighting against invisible pressure. Then behind him, a roar unlike thunder cracked across the night, resonating not in his headset, but in the bones of the machine. He climbed sharply, but the sound followed, too vast to be echo. Something alive was pacing him. He fired the first volley with mechanical precision, fingers cold on the trigger. Rockets tore free, their trails burning arcs across the black. For a moment, the desert sky lit white, and in that light, wings appeared. Enormous, feathered, black as obsidian, each plume catching firelight before dissolving back into shadow. They spanned wider than the Talon could measure, flexing not like metal, but like storm fronts bending sky. Hensley stared through the canopy, seeing not fuselage or engine, but a moving darkness that beat the air itself into submission. Then the light collapsed, and with it, the vision. Nothing remained but shadow, and the certainty that he had seen something no jet was built to face. The Talon bucked violently, tossed in unseen currents. Hensley tried again, missiles streaking into night, but the target dissolved, reappeared, untouchable. The creature moved through fire without harm, as if weapons were illusions. His cockpit rattled with every beat of unseen wings, alarms screaming though no system lived to generate them. He forced his grip tighter, refusing panic, forcing body and machine into one. Yet the rhythm outside grew deliberate, undeniable. Wings vast enough to break the air, a form too immense to be denied. This was no phantom, no illusion. It was the Thunderbird, and Hensley now knew he was fighting the impossible. Hensley forced the Talon into a dive, engines howling as the desert horizon spun. The jet spiraled downward, the G-forces crushing into his chest, but the shadow followed flawlessly. It was not pursuit in the sense of a chase. It was reflection, as if his every motion had already been anticipated. He banked, rolled, climbed sharply into the void, yet the presence clung to him, stretching wider, darker, unrelenting. Each maneuver, meant to escape, only confirmed the futility. For the first time, Hensley realized that speed, altitude, and skill, everything a pilot trusted, meant nothing against what hunted him. The Talon's radar erupted in chaos. What had been a clean sweep now fractured into madness, hundreds of signals, each identical, swarming across the screen. They flickered in and out, multiplying, then vanishing, as though the sky were filled with countless bodies moving as one. The creature was not singular. It was many, or appeared as many, an army made of itself. Hensley blinked hard, forcing focus, but the instruments betrayed him with impossible readings, altitude shifting, bearings spinning, every system lying at once. Outside, the canopy shook as lightningless flashes lit the horizon, tearing open the night like silent explosions. He gritted his teeth, wrestling the Talon into control, forcing it through the madness by instinct alone. The roar of wings grew louder, so vast it seemed to come from all directions at once. He tried to climb out, but the jet fought him, dragged by currents unseen. Sweat blurred his vision, his body stretched against the harness, every nerve screaming fatigue. And yet, through the static in his headset, he thought he heard voices, his comrades, repeating their final words, looping as though bound to the night itself. "It's moving, like wings." It's right behind me. The escape was no longer about survival. It had become a descent into something that refused to let him go. The storm of sound and motion collapsed into sudden silence. One moment, the talon rattled against unseen currents, and the next, it floated as if suspended in glass. Hensley's breath echoed too loud in the cockpit, each heartbeat a hammer against his chest. Outside the canopy, the desert sky no longer held stars. It was filled by a shape, vast, black, endless. From the void, a single wing unfolded, feathers shimmering with faint arcs of light, stretching until horizon bent. He froze, muscles locked, realizing there was no sky left. There was only it. And then the eye appeared. Immense, molten gold, staring into him through the canopy as if glass and steel did not exist. It was not the eye of an animal, nor the lens of a machine. It was ancient, endless, a furnace that saw through him with unbearable clarity. Hensley's hands trembled against the controls, but the talon no longer answered. The engines choked, extinguished as if the air itself had been withdrawn. Alarms died, gauges fell to zero, the cockpit smothered into stillness. He sat powerless, caught in a gaze that felt less like observation than judgment. He was not flying. He was held. For a heartbeat that lasted forever, nothing moved. Then the Thunderbird's wings beat once, and the jet cracked like paper in a storm. The canopy shook, glass spiderwebbing with fractures, while the desert below surged closer. Hensley glimpsed the body whole at last. Wings spanning storms, talons glowing with heat, a form both creature and tempest. And then it was gone. The talon struck earth with fire, scattering into fragments across sand. At dawn, search teams found only debris, metal twisted like bone, no trace of a pilot. But miles away, etched into the desert floor, were claw marks burned deep, leading out into the horizon. At dawn, search teams swept the desert where the talon had gone down. They found wreckage scattered like bones across the sand, metal twisted and blackened, fragments that had once been an aircraft. Yet of Captain Hensley there was no trace. No body, no parachute, not even the imprint of an ejection seat. The desert had consumed him as completely as it had revealed the Thunderbird. Soldiers walked the wreckage in silence, boots crunching against scorched earth, aware they were searching for something the desert would not return. It was absence that weighed heaviest, absence where a man should have been. Then, without warning, came the impossible. Hours after the search began, radar technicians called in astonishment. 4 contacts appeared where none had been for days. Convoys rushed to intercept, headlights piercing the morning haze. What they found stunned even the most hardened officers. 4 T-38 Talons stood on the desert floor, undamaged, as though they had landed moments ago. Their canopies cracked open, and inside the pilots were found alive. Unconscious, breathing steadily, their uniforms pristine. It was as if the night of their disappearance had folded and released them intact, pulled from nowhere back into the world. When the pilots awoke, confusion filled their eyes. They could not explain what had happened, nor where they had been. Each carried only fragments, a sense of darkness, the press of silence, echoes of wings that might have been memory or dream. When pressed for details, they faltered, words collapsing into silence. Medical teams cleared them, but command grew frustrated, their reports uselessly blank. For all practical purposes, the men had returned, but they had not come back with answers. It was as if whatever had claimed them had erased memory itself, leaving bodies alive but minds veiled in shadow. The contrast was inescapable. 4 pilots had been returned, living yet hollowed, while one had been taken with finality. At the crash site, searchers discovered markings in the sand, gouges burned deep, claw-shaped, stretching for miles before vanishing into horizon. Some said they were signs of fire, others dismissed them as tricks of erosion. But among the men who saw them, silence prevailed. The desert had made its choice. The Thunderbird had spared 4, but claimed 1. Official statements arrived quickly. drafted with the efficiency of protocol. The loss of Captain Hensley was recorded as a catastrophic mechanical failure, the kind of cold phrase that buries grief beneath procedure. Reports were typed in measured language, stripped of uncertainty, sealed with stamps that turned chaos into order on paper. To the public, nothing unusual had occurred. Another pilot lost, another accident filed in the endless ledger of the desert. But within Holloman, the silence pressed harder than any words. Men who had stood at the radios, who had heard the broken voices of their comrades stitched into thunder, knew better. They carried the truth in secret, because no one in command dared write it down. In the barracks, the weight grew heavier with each passing night. Pilots avoided speaking Hensley's name aloud, as though invoking it might summon what had taken him. Some drank hard, others prayed quietly. But all lived with the same thought unspoken. The desert had claimed a man in full view, and the Air Force had chosen to lie. It was not failure. It was not accident. It was something no order, no report, no officer could explain. And that silence, sanctioned and deliberate, became its own kind of terror. For silence has weight, and the men of Holloman carried it in their bones. In the weeks that followed, Holloman did not return to normal. Though schedules continued, drills resumed, and engines roared from hangars, the air around the base carried a weight that no order could lift. At night, technicians swore they heard wings beating against the empty hangars, a sound too vast to belong to anything on Earth. Patrols along the perimeter reported flashes of light across the desert sky, not lightning, but arcs that pulsed like feathers catching fire. Each man who heard or saw such things carried it in silence, for to speak it aloud risked more than ridicule. It risked remembering. Beyond the fences, the Navajo people performed rituals at the edge of sight, fires burning low, chants whispered into the wind. They said the Thunderbird now carried the soul of Captain Hensley, bound to the storm, neither lost nor alive, but part of the Guardian's flight. Soldiers stationed nearby watched uneasily, unwilling to approach, but unable to ignore. For them, the sight of ritual confirmed what reports denied, that something had entered the desert and stayed. The elders' words echoed through memory. The Guardian has returned, and now they believed the return was not momentary. It was permanent. And still, the machines spoke. On nights when storms gathered, the radar screens flickered with a single contact, a point solitary, appearing where no craft should be. It lingered for moments, then dissolved, only to return again in the same sector. Officers dismissed it as an anomaly, an artifact of interference. But the men who watched it appear night after night knew better. They said the point was a trace, not of a machine, but of a presence. Something unseen, circling above, refusing to leave. And in their silence, one truth grew undeniable. The Thunderbird had not vanished. It had claimed the sky. Weeks after the crash, long after the wreckage had been cleared and reports filed, a patrol combing the desert perimeter stumbled upon something overlooked. Buried in sand, scorched at the edges but intact, lay a small leather-bound notebook, the personal diary of Captain Hensley. Its last pages were unlike anything else in the book. Gone were the clean lines of technical notes, replaced instead with frantic sketches of wings stretching across the sky, of eyes burning with fire. Words were repeated over and over, written in a hand that trembled across the page. He saw me. He called me. I am the chosen. To the officers who received it, these were signs of a collapsing mind, the breakdown of a man pressed too far. Yet among the pilots who read those words in secret, there was no such certainty. Some whispered that Hensley had not gone mad at all, that he had been claimed, body and soul, by the Guardian of the Storm. And in that thought lay a possibility darker than any accident report, that the Thunderbird had not destroyed him, but transformed him. Years later, storms still rolled over the New Mexico desert, and with them came whispers. Some claimed that when the Thunderbird roared, another voice could be heard woven into the storm, human and anguished, calling through the thunder. For the Navajo, it was proof that Hensley had become part of the Guardian itself, bound forever to the flight of the sky's master. For others, it was only legend, born from fear and silence. But the doubt remains, as enduring as the desert. Was he taken or remade? Was he destroyed or chosen? The answers lie beyond reach, in skies no longer ours to command. Leave us your thoughts in the comments. What do you believe truly happened to Captain Hensley? We'll see you in the next story.